Hello to all of you who are joining this conference. Today we will study conference number 10, part of the cycle of 25 conferences that forms Phase B, the second part of this self-knowledge course. In previous conferences, we have spoken about the initiatory path. This path is composed of 3 great works. These works that we must accomplish are symbolically represented as mountains to climb, as an analogy for the challenges involved in this inner work. If you reflect on what it means to climb a mountain, you will understand why this work is described in this way. Climbing a mountain is a very demanding effort. The higher you go, the greater the effort and sacrifice required. Many people abandon the climb at a certain point, and only a few reach the summit. The same process occurs internally for those who receive this knowledge and begin to work on themselves. In this conference and the next 2, we will explain in detail the work related to each of these mountains. These 3 conferences are extremely important. If we clearly understand the path and its stages in advance, we will be able to recognize them once we begin to live them. For example, when we speak about the trials that must be experienced at a specific initiation, you will understand why you are going through certain experiences at that moment. You will also know in advance what you must do to continue progressing and what the next step is. Even when we discuss the initial steps required to begin the path, this information is valuable for everyone because it clearly shows what must be done to start the work. The knowledge we receive here is very important. It was given by masters who have already achieved self-realization in order to help all who are willing to work on themselves find the practical tools that can lead them to self-realization. And what is self-realization? It is the liberation of the totality of our soul, the awakening of 100% of our consciousness, and the complete union with our own inner being. Internally, this process is accomplished by climbing these 3 mountains. In today's conference, we will focus on the work of the first mountain, the first great work of creation that must be completed on the path towards self-realization. The objective of this session is to identify when the initiatory path begins, what works must be carried out, and how the ascent of the first mountain unfolds. We begin this work by receiving the knowledge. Once we receive it, we become aware that there is an inner path to follow, and that there are techniques and tools that allow us to start and advance on that path. At first, we all begin as sympathizers of this knowledge. We listen to the conferences and reflect upon them. At that moment, 2 paths open before us. One path belongs to those who decide whether to believe or not believe in the knowledge they receive, but who never truly practice it to verify it. They remain at the level of sympathizers. The other path is taken by those who, after receiving the knowledge, decide to practice it and verify it for themselves. Anyone who applies this knowledge begins to experience its results. They verify the effectiveness of psychological death, the regenerative process, and the power that is gradually recovered through chastity and the wise use of sexual energy. They begin to repay their karmic debts through conscious sacrifice for humanity, and the principles of conscious love start to develop within them. This practical individual is the one who succeeds in igniting the sacred fire and beginning the ascent of the first mountain, where the development of the human soul takes place. In this way, one moves from the condition of a rational animal to becoming a true human being with a soul, a being composed of forces, powers, and faculties that provide self-mastery and greater harmony with nature. The second and third mountains will then complete the development of the spiritual aspect of the being, culminating in the full integration with the inner being. The first mountain is the mountain of birth, of Genesis. On this mountain, we perform the purification of our genetic inheritance, which has been deeply affected by sexual bonds and the contamination of sexual energy. It is also on this mountain that we learn to be born internally, meaning that we create our inner bodies through the wise use of sexual energy in the practice of suprasex. The second mountain is the mountain of death, where we work toward the total elimination of the ego, down to its root causes. The third mountain is primarily dedicated to conscious sacrifice for humanity. It is essential to remember that, In order to begin and progress through each of these mountains, continuous and combined work on the three factors for the revolution of consciousness is indispensable. To achieve chastity, the purification of energy is absolutely necessary. Everything begins with chastity. And to attain chastity, the purification of our waters, meaning our sexual creative energy, is essential. Energy requires a certain level of purity in order to rise. Contaminated energy tends to be expelled from the body, and when this happens, the inner fire is also lost. Therefore, we must begin by working with and refining our own energies. The human being can be understood as a machine composed of 7 centers, 2 higher centers and 5 lower ones. These 5 lower centers do not operate with their own proper energy, which is why the human machine functions in an unbalanced way. Among these 5 centers, the first 4 constantly draw energy from the 5th center, which is the sexual center. For this reason, no one can achieve chastity without first learning to properly organize the human machine. In other words, the 5 centers must begin to function correctly, each one operating with its own corresponding energy. Only in this way can we produce hydrogen-12, which corresponds to the sexual center. As long as this inner work is not carried out, progress will be impossible. The sexual energy will remain unstable, just like the other centers, and imbalance will continue. Hydrogen-12 is the natural energy of sex, the energy through which the sexual center functions in a healthy and balanced way. When this energy is transformed through scientific chastity, it becomes Si-12. This transformation occurs through the elimination of the subtle psychological elements that constantly appear within us, such as lust, pride, revenge, hatred, anxiety, and similar defects. These psychological details steal and destabilize sexual energy, preventing the achievement of chastity, since the centers are not functioning with their own proper energies. Each center takes energy from another. All of them, in one way or another, draw from the sexual center. At the same time, the sexual center, in order to function, may also draw from the others. The result is a completely unbalanced human machine. This produces a chaotic exchange of energies that does not lead to harmony, but instead continues to feed psychological defects, making it impossible to enter the initiatory path. Anyone who wishes to balance the human machine must begin to eliminate psychological defects. No matter how subtle their expression may be, we must request their elimination from the Divine Mother. We must remain in continuous self-observation, identifying defects that attempt to manifest through our emotions, thoughts, actions, and words. By doing so, we can correct our inner functioning, preserve the energy of the centers, and gradually restore balance to the human machine. In this way, we truly begin to advance toward our objective, which is to enter and progress along the initiatory path. When we begin working with the elimination of defects in detail, changes in energy naturally occur within us. The process begins with black mercury, then progresses to white, then yellow, and finally red. An individual working alone may reach yellow mercury. To reach red mercury, one must practice suprasex with a stable partner. Red mercury represents the sacred fire. When the sacred fire awakens, it begins to rise along the spinal column. This marks the true beginning of the work required to ascend the first mountain, the esoteric work. There is no other way to begin. Without this foundation, the work has not truly started. Theories alone are not enough. Only practical facts move the disciple forward. The alchemical process that allows the crystallization of the existential bodies of the being takes place within the spinal column, each time suprasex is practiced with the partner. In the sexual center, 3 alchemical elements must be combined: mercury, sulfur, and salt. These 3 elements are obtained through the consistent practice of the 3 factors for the revolution of consciousness. Salt represents the payment received through sacrificial work for humanity. This includes the effort of sharing this knowledge and these tools with others so that they may awaken their consciousness. Sulfur represents the essences, or sparks of consciousness, that are liberated each time we request the elimination of a psychological defect that we have observed and understood. Mercury represents the sexual energy that we preserve and purify. This energy must reach an optimal level of purity so that the sacred fire, known as Kundalini, can be awakened in the spine. When we have already transformed our Mercury to the yellow stage, and we have established a stable relationship with a partner of the opposite sex with whom we are successfully practicing supersex, we will face what is known as a trial of fire. This trial often appears as a test of our ability to control anger. If we overcome it successfully, then during the practice of sexual energy, the Kundalini serpent awakens, which means that the sacred fire is ignited. At this stage, Mercury becomes red. When this red energy is transmuted and directed toward the higher centers, it transforms into hydrogen S12, the energy required for the crystallization of the existential bodies of the being. From that moment on, every time supersex is practiced, the sexual energy no longer ascends through the Sushumna channel. Instead, it begins to rise and condense through the Nadi Chitra, the channel through which the inner bodies are formed. When the first vertebra is filled with energy, something significant occurs in the internal worlds. We receive a silver sword. This symbolizes that we have been initiated into the White Lodge. This sword is small, with a white handle, and it must be placed immediately at our belt, because the Black Lodge will attempt to take it away. The Black Lodge will try to tempt us into fornication or adultery so that we lose this sword. This sword represents our willpower and gives us greater strength to eliminate our internal Black Lodge, which is our ego. By doing so, we gradually become more invulnerable to external influences, since external forces can only dominate us through our psychological defects. Possessing this small sword indicates that we have begun the ascent of the first mountain. To progress through each step or initiation of this mountain, we must continually pass specific trials. The disciple first encounters the trial of the guardian, where he must confront the inner beast he has created throughout centuries of existence. Second are the trials of the four elements: fire, air, water, and earth. The candidate is tested in due order. These trials are repeated many times. Even if one has already passed them, they reappear at different levels because each test corresponds to a specific grade. After these come additional examinations that challenge pride, vanity, lust, hatred, and other defects. This process is long, and the tests repeat again and again. This requires constant daily discipline from the student in order to successfully pass these trials, which are often subtle and difficult, involving sentimentality, attachment, material possessions, family ties, and similar influences. In this work, we must refine ourselves deeply, understanding our psychological defects thoroughly in order to act correctly within. Otherwise, everything can be lost, and stagnation may occur until the necessary correction is made. When working with hydrogen Si12, the sacred fire awakens and the ascent of the first mountain begins. These are the fire initiations, in which the rise of the fire progresses according to the depth of the psychological work being performed. For this reason, it is necessary to maintain balance between death, birth, and sacrifice for humanity if one wishes to advance rapidly. The sacred fire ascends in accordance with the merits of the heart. A selfish person takes much longer to ascend the fire, sometimes 3 times longer, because such a person focuses only on personal gain and does not share the teachings with others. In other words, there is no genuine concern for humanity. Yet this is the essential principle that the initiate must understand. If one wishes to save oneself, one must work to help others awaken as well. That is what is called love. At the beginning of the work, the sword is very small. As the fire rises, the sword gradually grows until the inner being becomes fully incarnated, transforming it into the flaming sword, the sword of magical power, which grants mastery over nature. As the ascent continues, chakra by chakra, vertebra by vertebra, the inner churches awaken. The initiate gains mastery over the 4 elements of nature during this ascent, until reaching the 5th initiation of the major mysteries, at which point he is recognized as an authentic human being. In the 5th major initiation, the initiate must choose between the direct path and the spiral path of nirvana. The choice depends on the revolution of consciousness. If the person is passive, he chooses the spiral. If the person is revolutionary, he chooses the direct path. Those who choose the spiral of nirvana are not interested in final liberation. However, the spiral path is not recommended, even for an enemy, because it does not lead to true liberation. The invitation, therefore, is for those who are revolutionary in spirit to reflect deeply and be willing to risk everything for the highest goal. The direct path brings true victories and conscious rewards, granted by the higher hierarchies to those who complete this inner work. On the spiral path, there are no real gains, no true rewards, and no final liberation. When one chooses the direct path, the sacred triad is incarnated: Atman, Buddhi, and Manas. When the causal body, which corresponds to Manas, is fully created, the two higher forces are also embodied, and the initiate becomes a master of the major mysteries, specifically of the mysteries of fire. However, it is important not to confuse the mysteries of fire with the initiations of gold, which belong to the second mountain. When the three forces are fully incarnated within the initiate, he becomes a master. At the culmination of this mountain, he is entitled to enter a round and beautiful chapel in the internal worlds, where he may rest, meditate, review, and reflect upon the work he has completed. This stage is very precise and significant because much wisdom remains there, wisdom that will later be expressed. After this period of reflection, he renounces that state of happiness and prepares to begin the second mountain. Once we have acquired a human soul, we may unite it with our divine soul. From the union of these two souls, human and divine, the intimate Christ is gestated within. This event represents the celebration of the Christmas of the heart, and it marks the beginning of the ascent of the second mountain. We will explore the process of the second mountain and the development of the intimate Christ in detail in the next conference. Thank you all very much for participating in this session. Remember that you may always send us any questions or doubts you have about the subject, and we will be happy to respond. Until the next conference.